Hi, this is Susan Ortega, and I want to share with you my presentation about my privileges project for TEEL 230 VA. I titled this presentation, I Love You and I Need Your Money, Living on $4.50 per day in Topeka, Kansas. The original impetus for this project is the SNAP Challenge that is offered each year by harvesters in Topeka, and that is where they challenge individuals to live like they were receiving supplemental nutrition benefits. And the average amount of nutrition benefits for a single individual in Topeka is $4.50 per day. And in my case, I didn't want to try to make do on such a small amount of money, so I recruited my husband to participate with me as well so that I could increase my overall budget from $4.50 per day to $9 per day. That gave me a grand total budget for 7 days of $63. This was a opportunity for me to try out a different lifestyle because normally I just go to the grocery store and I purchase whatever I feel like without regard to cost. This amount of money needed to cover anything that was going to be consumed, and that included dining out. There were a few exceptions. The first exception is that my husband works out of town multiple times each week, and he cannot transport a lunch, and his meal is paid for by his employer, so I was not considering those expenses to be part of our $63 budget. And then I also had food in my home that had already been purchased, and I considered that would be a replicant for anything that someone would receive on public assistance if they had gone to a food bank or a meal sharing location. I do acknowledge that I started off significantly better than most individuals, as my refrigerator and pantry were pretty well stocked. But I didn't want to make assumptions about what someone would have based on what they were receiving from food pantries or from family members. This was an image of a composite image of sort of the 4 different places they keep food in my house. And so I did start off with a lot of fresh fruits and veggies. And I had plenty of spices. I had rice and beans. And I also had a ham that I had purchased for a party that didn't quite work out. And so I had a very expensive, large $30 ham in my fridge, which was quite a luxury to be able to say that I had. I went to Dillon's, which is the grocery store that I typically use in Topeka, and I spent $51.77 of my $63 budget. That left me an additional $11.23 to use throughout the week. Since I wasn't sure what I was going to be doing, and I wanted to be very broad in my approach, I really just bought staples. And the circling on the receipt, they do that here at our Dillon's in Topeka because they want you to take their survey for gas points. And so it doesn't actually, I didn't want anyone looking at that image to think that it was indicative of anything. It was just they wanted me to fill out their survey, which I didn't do and probably should have done and gotten those gas points. This was my first meal. On the right, I just realized I inverted these pictures. But on the right, I had berries and yogurt, and that cost me nothing because those were items that I already had. And then the first day of my privilege experience was on January 7th, and that's a professional development day in Topeka Public Schools. And so I had lunch with some friends, and that cost me $5.77. And we had a very busy PD day, and so after that I still had to come home and make dinner, which was chicken fajitas. And there was no material cost associated with doing that, but I was just very tired. It had been a very long day and a very active PD, and so the cost was more emotional, and that I was very tired, so very tired. Day two, I just realized I inverted that image again too. I think I kind of got into a pattern. On day two, I had yogurt and berries again, but I also wanted to supplement them with some eggs for protein. I was pretty hungry after the yogurt and berries, but it didn't cost me very much money. Um, and so we have a vending area in our school, and so I just had a bag of chips for lunch. And then for dinner, we picked up some lettuce and turned our remaining chicken fajitas into chicken fajita salad. And so at this point, on the first day, I spent $5.77. On the second day, I managed to spend $4.75. Within 2 days, I've spent almost my remaining surplus of $11. Which leads me to day three. I had oatmeal for breakfast, and that was a no-cost item. And I ate a school lunch for $3.75. And afterwards, my husband had to travel that day, and so when he came home, it was very late. And we made a decision that we would go to one of our favorite restaurants in Topeka, which is called McFarland's, and enjoy cheeseburgers with French fries and the tip because it's a full-service restaurant. And so this is where I'm starting to see the downfall of my privilege, and I'm very much struggling. So I've already exceeded my budget at this point, and I'm working very hard to find a redemption, so to speak. And so that came in the form of day four, where I had eggs with vegetarian sausage, which I already had, and that was $0. I skipped lunch, saved the money, and then at home we had salads from the leftover vegetables and fruit that we already had, and so that was also $0. Day five was a Friday. Every Friday morning, my husband and I make a point of going to Chick-fil-A to have breakfast together, since we have both work very busy, harried schedules. It's nice to set aside one morning each week where we're guaranteed to be together. And I'm a Chick-fil-A Red member, and Chick-fil-A has these tiers of membership, and so I accrue points with every purchase I make. And so I was able to use those points to pay for my meal. I had a school lunch, and I also had ramen for dinner. I wanted to actually have ramen for two reasons. One was because it's very culturally relevant for me as an Asian American female. It's something that I grew up with and I find very comforting. But in America, ramen is actually very stereotypical for being a low-income food substance. And I wanted to have something that I don't actually eat ramen very often because it has very high sodium content, and that's not necessarily the healthiest for you. And it's also fried, as opposed to, say, a fresh soba or an udon or even just Chinese noodles. And so I thought, I'm going to give this a go. It wasn't terrible. It had been a while since I'd had some, so it was actually pretty tasty. On day six, so my husband and I indulged a little bit. I used to, before I became a social worker teacher, I used to actually own a bakery, and so I made homemade biscuits and gravy, and that was about $10. I didn't have a receipt for it, and so I had to sort of guesstimate how much it cost me actually. And then we took that ham and used that ham to make sandwiches, and then we enjoyed some Pizza Hut. One of the things that I got to experience in this challenge is that it was, the Privilege Project in and of itself is sort of an artificial experience because at the end of the day, I still have my own life. I haven't really lost anything of my life truly. It's just what is the amount of self-control and self-discipline that I'm going to put forth. And sometimes there's these social pressure moments, and this was one of them, where I really felt like this would be inappropriate for me not to participate. So, and then the next day, I was able to take those items that I'd paid about $57 the day before for, and turn those into a $0 day of not spending any money. So all told, with all of the expenses, I spent a total of $162.85 over the course of 7 days. And that was for two individuals, for two adult people to eat. And in and of itself, I don't feel like comparatively to what I would normally have spent during a time frame of about a week, it was about half of what I would have normally spent. But it was still significantly more than I should have, to the tune of about $99.85. And I really decided that I struggled, and then I ultimately failed. There were 5 reasons that this occurred for me. The first was that I didn't change my mindset. I was very fixed in my thinking about this assignment. One of the things that I've really come to understand is about myself is that when it's something I don't necessarily feel like doing, that the emotionality of it sort of makes me feel very fixed in my thinking. Then the second part was, and I to be frank with you, I have no idea why I didn't feel like doing it. This project was of my own design, and initially I very strongly embraced it. But what I also saw was that once I started spending over the $63, I started to justify that it didn't matter because I was already over budget. And I teach 5th grade, and it starts to become the well, what else are you going to do to me kind of thing, like, because one more thing is it's just one more thing. It's not that important anymore. The third thing was I had social obligations that I needed to meet, and I didn't want to explain this project. And that is actually really related, I think, more heavily than my social status as Susan Ortega. It's related more heavily with my age. Because I'm 43, most of my friends are in their 40s, and the idea that I'm back at undergraduate school, working on my teaching certification, that in and of itself is an abnormality. It's sort of atypical, and I just didn't want to have to explain it to everybody that I was hanging out with, which is kind of funny because I didn't want to either go one way where I'd be preachy and sort of soapboxy about it, like, oh my goodness, your latte costs more than a normal person is being allotted for food. And the other part was that I didn't want to receive a lecture because in situations like this, I didn't want to make the people that I was hanging out with and my friends, I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. And so I just sort of fell on my sword for this. And then the fourth thing was it seems punishing to have to cook after a long day at work. This is more of a habit than it is a truism, but as a working professional who also takes a full load of classes, in the last semester what I kind of developed was this mindset of, cooking and grocerying and etc. are just one more task on a very long to-do list, and probably the best thing to do for that is to just strike that off by, stopping by a restaurant or getting a takeout or having something delivered, and so I'm sort of used to that level of comfort. And then I think I spoke on this a couple of times, but it's really true, is that food reflects social class, and it's also a status symbol. I know my husband and I, the very first splurge that we had that took us over the $63 budget was going for burgers at our favorite sort of mom and pop kind of diner sit down restaurant. And if we were in Chicago, $36 for a cheeseburger is kind of no big deal. But in Kansas, if you're going to get something inexpensive, then you might be grabbing a value meal at McDonald's and spending about a half, if not a third of that amount, and also not tipping anyone. And I try to eat nutritiously for the most part, and so I wanted to go to some place that I knew had great beef and had made their own buns and they cut their own fries, and they do a lot of extra things that just make their food extra special. But it also means that it costs a lot more money. And then if I was to do this project over again, the first thing I would do is I would start with nothing. Having all of that extra food, including that $30 ham, in the fridge kind of kept me in my comfort zone. And since I was working out of my own kitchen with my own supplies, a lot of my meals were $0 because I had so much food already on tap. I think the chicken fajitas were the primary thing I bought with my grocery money, and um, and that kind of means that I spent nearly $50 on one meal. And the second thing was to really take a good look at myself and be able to explain and be prepared to explain myself. I felt shame, which seems so interesting because to be ashamed about it, it kind of kept me trapped, pretending that I was comfortable spending, but it also kept me trapped because I didn't want to actually think about the realities that some folks have to face. And that was the entire purpose of this project. It's like reading the book and not getting the main idea. And I think the fact that there was some emotion with it for me, I certainly learned a lot about myself. And that's that I can speak to that. And number 3, that to truly empathize with someone in poverty, I need to understand they don't have a backup. Budgets may be very fixed, and maybe the only way that they could overspend is to take that money from a different budget or item or to not pay a bill on time. And that can set you up for sort of a cascading catastrophic failure that I didn't have to worry about. Because on the back end for me was my normal checking account. And, I can actually hear it in my narration as I'm going over this, that I still feel so uncomfortable about the idea that I had this big struggle of letting go. I'm actually going to step back to the slide that had my total amount of money, with the exception of my meals out, which totaled totaled $83.06. With the total of that, if I would have avoided those 2 meals out, I would have come in very, very close to my total allotted amount. And certainly been well within, a comfort level of having experienced some of the privilege items. And on the flip side, if I would have avoided having a second grocery trip on January 12th and having those 2 meals out, I would have been easily within the range because that was a total of $93.06. And since I missed my budget by $99.85, it would have been nice to have been within even within $10 of the $63 amount. So I was unable to fully shake my privilege, and I almost want to do this again, but I want to do it at a time where I have more time available to devote to it, because it's sort of like the idea of diet and weight loss and exercise that happens for a lot of folks at the beginning of the year. you sort of get you get really excited about a particular date, like a very arbitrary date, and so you make your schedule very flexible for that to happen. Well, on the flip side of that is the idea that, you're doing a lot of this stuff because it is January 1st. Well, in my case, I think I went into this ready, like with excuses at the ready as to why this was not going to work out, and it was certainly eye-opening for a lot of reasons, not just for my privilege, but also for how rigid I am and how fixed I am in and just not wanting to confront certain things. So, well, I thank you very much for taking a look at my presentation, and I look forward to seeing some of my fellow classmates' presentations. And I hope we have a great spring semester, and I hope 2019 is a great year for you. Thank you so much.